Michael sat in the living room staring at the shadows that stretched across the walls. Just hours earlier, his wife Claire had left. She hadn't shouted, hadn't slammed the door, she had simply packed her suitcase and walked out, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any fight they'd ever had. Michael tried to piece together her last words, but they felt blurry in his memory. All he could remember clearly was the sound of the zipper on her bag and the echo of her footsteps fading away. The house felt wrong without her. The photos on the mantel showed smiling faces, summer vacations, birthdays that once seemed full of promise. Michael picked one up, tracing Claire's smile with his thumb, and wondered when that smile had stopped being for him. He thought of the dinners where she barely spoke, the nights she stayed late at work, and the way she had begun to look through him instead of at him. The signs were all there, but he had ignored them, believing that love could hold everything together. Now the truth was sitting in front of him. Cold and undeniable, he was alone. Michael walked into the kitchen, but the sight of 2 untouched coffee mugs on the counter stopped him. He had made her a cup that morning, hoping it might soften her mood. She hadn't even touched it. He poured both cups down the sink, the dark liquid swirling away like pieces of his broken marriage. The sound of the water only reminded him of how empty the house had become. He sat back on the couch, trying to keep his breathing steady, but his chest felt heavy. He wanted to call someone, to hear a voice that would tell him this wasn't the end of everything. Yet he couldn't bring himself to reach for the phone. He wasn't sure if anyone would understand. He wasn't even sure he understood it himself. Then the doorbell rang. Michael froze. His first thought was Claire had returned. His heart jumped, but he quickly dismissed it. Claire wasn't the type to leave and then come back right away. Slowly he got up and opened the door. Standing there was Evelyn, Claire's mother. Her presence caught him off guard. She looked calm, dressed in a simple cardigan, and holding a small bag in her hand. Her eyes, however, carried something deeper, a mixture of concern and quiet strength. "Michael didn't know what to say, Michael," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth. "May I come in?" He stepped aside, unsure of why she was there. Evelyn had always been kind to him, but he expected anger now. After all, her daughter had walked away, and it would have been easy for Evelyn to blame him. Yet she walked in gently, as though she wasn't here to accuse, but to understand. They sat in the living room, the same space that had just moments ago felt unbearably empty. Michael tried to speak, but found himself struggling for words. Finally, he said, "She's gone." Evelyn looked at him with steady eyes. "I know," she replied, her tone neither sharp nor surprised. "She called me before she left." Michael felt his throat tighten. "Then you know. She doesn't want this anymore." Evelyn paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people leave not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay. Claire, she's searching for something, and it's not something you could have fixed alone." Her words startled Michael. He had braced himself for blame, but instead she was offering him comfort. It was unexpected, almost disarming. He leaned back into the couch, letting her words sink in. For the first time that night, the silence in the house didn't feel crushing. Evelyn's presence filled the space in a way he hadn't anticipated. She didn't press him for details, didn't dig into wounds that were already raw. She simply sat there, giving him the one thing he hadn't realized he needed: companionship in the middle of his heartbreak. Michael glanced at her, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something in her eyes, something unspoken. But he brushed it aside, telling himself he was imagining things. His mind was too clouded with pain to think clearly. Still, one question lingered in him. Why had she come here tonight, of all nights? And with that thought, he realized part of his story was only just beginning. Evelyn didn't rush to speak. She sat across from Michael with calm eyes, her hands folded neatly on her lap, as though she understood silence could sometimes heal more than words. Michael, however, felt restless. He kept looking at the carpet, the coffee table, anywhere but her face. He wanted to say something that would explain how lost he felt, but every sentence collapsed before it reached his lips. Finally, Evelyn broke the stillness. "Michael," she said softly, "I didn't come here to talk about blame. I came because I know you're hurting, and I didn't want you to face this night alone." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He had prepared himself for anger, for accusations about how he had failed Claire. Instead, he heard understanding. He looked up at her, confused, but there was only sincerity in her gaze. "I loved Claire," Michael said suddenly, the words spilling out. "I did everything I knew how to do. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't enough." His voice cracked and he leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. Evelyn leaned closer, her tone firm but gentle. "Don't say that. You gave her love, stability, a home. You were there for her. Sometimes people drift away not because the other person wasn't enough, but because they themselves are searching for something else." Michael took in her words, feeling a strange mixture of comfort and sorrow. "Then why does it feel like I've lost everything?" he asked quietly. "Because you invested your whole heart," she replied. "And when you give that much, the absence feels unbearable. But Michael, don't let this moment convince you that you are less. You are still the man who loved with honesty, and that matters." Her voice had a calm strength, and Michael felt something shift inside him. He realized she wasn't just speaking for her daughter's sake, she was speaking for him, for the man sitting in pieces before her. The hours moved quickly as Michael opened up. He spoke about how the distance had grown in his marriage, about the nights Claire came home late, about the emptiness he tried to hide even from himself. He admitted he had pretended everything was fine because he didn't want to face the truth that love might not last forever. Evelyn listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. Her expression never judgmental. At one point, Michael looked at her and said, "I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You're her mother. You should hate me." Evelyn shook her head gently. "Hate doesn't solve anything. And I don't hate you, Michael. I see your pain and I know your heart. You were good to Claire. You deserve someone to remind you of that, even if she couldn't." Her kindness felt like a lifeline, something Michael hadn't realized he desperately needed. For the first time since Claire walked out, he felt less alone. He looked at Evelyn differently, now not just as his wife's mother, but as someone who understood him in a way even Claire hadn't at the end. Later, she rose and walked into the kitchen. She moved with quiet purpose, finding cups and boiling water for tea as though she belonged there. When she returned, she handed him a steaming mug. Michael wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into him. It wasn't just the tea that calmed him, it was her gesture. The simple act of caring. As they sat sipping, Evelyn spoke again, her tone softer now. "Michael, I know this hurts more than words can describe. But don't let the hurt make you blind to what you still are. You're strong, kind, and you deserve peace." Michael watched her as she spoke, noticing how her eyes held a quiet light, how her presence seemed to steady the broken pieces of him. For a brief moment, he wondered if Claire had inherited her mother's warmth, but somehow lost the ability to give it. The night grew late, yet neither of them seemed eager to end the conversation. The more they talked, the more Michael felt like he was being pulled out of a storm. Evelyn didn't fix his pain, but she gave him space to breathe again. At one point he said, almost in disbelief, "It feels easier talking to you than it ever did with Claire in the last year." Evelyn's expression softened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she simply reached out and placed her hand over his for a brief moment. A silent reminder that he wasn't invisible, that someone still cared. The touch was light, gone almost as quickly as it came, but it lingered in Michael's chest long after. He didn't know what it meant, and maybe she didn't either. But in that quiet moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, hope. As the clock neared midnight, Evelyn stood. "I should let you rest," she said, gathering her bag. "But remember, Michael, you don't have to go through this alone. I'll check in on you." Michael nodded, his throat tight with unspoken gratitude. Watching her walk to the door, he realized the night had changed something inside him. His grief was still there, heavy and sharp, but alongside it was a strange, unexpected comforter presence he hadn't thought would matter, yet somehow did. And as the door closed behind her, Michael sat in the quiet house again. This time, however, the silence didn't feel quite as crushing. Instead, it carried the memory of Evelyn's words, her warmth, and that fleeting touch that left him wondering if this story was far from over. The weeks that followed Claire's departure were heavy, but Evelyn's presence became a quiet anchor for Michael. At first, her visits felt like small acts of kindness, a home-cooked meal, a short conversation to break the silence, a helping hand when the house seemed too large for one man to manage. But over time, Michael began to look forward to those visits more than he wanted to admit. Her footsteps in the hallway, her voice calling his name, even the way she rearranged the flowers on the table brought a sense of life back into the house. It wasn't just about company. It was the comfort of being seen. Evelyn listened when he spoke, really listened, without rushing to change the subject or dismiss his feelings. She reminded him of the good in himself when all he could see was failure. And slowly he found himself laughing again, smiling at small things, even remembering what it felt like to breathe without HEAVINS. As one Friday evening after a long workday, Michael returned home to find Evelyn waiting on the porch with a casserole dish in her hands. "I thought you might not have eaten yet," she said with her usual gentle smile. Michael felt his chest ease at the sight of her. "You didn't have to," he replied, holding the door open. "I wanted to," she said simply. Stepping inside, they ate together at the kitchen table. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt warm again. Michael found himself watching the way Evelyn spoke, how her eyes lit up when she shared a story about her garden or her friends. She carried herself with a kind of grace he hadn't noticed before. He caught himself staring more than once and quickly looked away, afraid of what that meant. Later, after dinner, they moved to the living room. The fireplace crackled, filling the silence with its soft rhythm. Evelyn sat across from him, sipping tea, while Michael leaned back, feeling more relaxed than he had in months. "You know," Evelyn began, her tone thoughtful, "I was worried about you. When Claire told me she was leaving, I thought you'd shut the world out. But you've surprised me." Michael gave a faint laugh. "I didn't feel strong at all. But you've made it easier. I don't think I would have gotten through these weeks without you." Her eyes softened at his words, and something unspoken hung in the air between them. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, not emptiness. Michael felt it in his chest, a strange pull he couldn't name. He looked at her, really looked, and realized how different this was from anything he had felt before. They began sharing stories, simple ones about the past. Michael talked about his childhood summers by the lake, how he used to fish with his father. Evelyn told him about raising Claire, about the joy and the struggles of motherhood. The hours slipped by unnoticed, laughter bubbling up between them as if they had known each other far longer than they actually had. At one point, Evelyn leaned back and shook her head with a smile. "It's been so long since I've laughed like this." Michael felt his chest tighten. "Me too." The firelight flickered across her face, and Michael noticed details he had never let himself notice before: the kindness in her smile, the strength in her eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity. For a fleeting moment, he wondered what it would feel like to be closer to her, to lean into the comfort she brought. He pushed the thought away, guilty for even letting it cross his mind. But the feeling didn't fade. As the evening grew later, Evelyn stood to leave, but her movements were slower, almost hesitant. Michael walked her to the door, and when she turned to face him, their eyes locked for just a moment longer than usual. It was the kind of look that spoke without words, that left both of them aware something had shifted. "Thank you for tonight," Michael said quietly. "Not just the food, but everything. You've made this house feel alive again." Evelyn's lips curved into a soft smile. "You're stronger than you know, Michael. Don't forget that." Their hands brushed as she handed him the empty dish. The contact was brief, but it sent a warmth through him he couldn't explain. He wanted to hold on to it, to not let her leave. But instead, he stood frozen, watching her step out into the night. When the door closed, Michael leaned against it, his heart unsteady. He had expected to feel only grief these weeks, but instead something new had begun to grow. Something he hadn't seen coming. That night, lying awake in bed, he replayed every moment by the fire. Every laugh they had shared, every glance that lingered too long. He told himself it was nothing, just gratitude mixed with loneliness. But deep down, he knew better. Evelyn wasn't just helping him survive his heartbreak. She was changing the way he felt about love itself. And though he tried to resist the thought, one question echoed in his mind. What if the person who understood him most wasn't the one who had left, but the one who had stayed? Michael woke the next morning with Evelyn still on his mind. Her laughter from the night before echoed in his ears, and the warmth of her hand brushing his had stayed with him through his restless sleep. He told himself it was nothing, just a lonely heart clinging to kindness. But no matter how hard he tried, the feeling wouldn't fade. He moved through his day distracted, replaying moments he shouldn't have been replaying. By the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, Evelyn stood there again. This time without a casserole or flowers, just herself, looking calm but serious. Michael's chest tightened. Something about her expression told him this visit was different. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. He nodded and stepped aside. She walked into the living room and set her bag down, then turned to face him. For a moment, neither spoke. Michael's heartbeat quickened. He sensed she was carrying words she had rehearsed but hadn't yet decided whether to release. Finally, she broke the silence. "Michael," she began, her tone steady but gentle. "I've been thinking about these past weeks. About the time we've spent together." She paused, searching his eyes. "I didn't come here just because Claire asked me to check on you. I came because I wanted to." Michael swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. He managed a quiet, "You've helped me more than you know." Evelyn stepped closer. "And you've reminded me of something I thought I lost a long time ago, the feeling of being truly seen. Michael, I know this isn't what either of us expected, but I can't ignore what's growing in my heart." Her words hit him with the weight of truth. He stared at her, stunned. "Evelyn, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes steady but vulnerable. "I care about you. Not as Claire's husband. Not as someone broken. But as you seemed to freeze around him." Michael felt a rush of emotions, shock, confusion, fear, but also a deep and undeniable pull. For weeks, he had felt something stirring, something he tried to dismiss. Now, hearing it spoken aloud, he realized he wasn't alone in feeling it. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. This is impossible," he said, his voice unsteady. "You're her mother. People would never understand." Evelyn moved closer, her voice calm but firm. "Life doesn't always follow rules, Michael. Love doesn't ask permission from anyone else. It grows where it chooses." She held his gaze. "And it's grown here, between us." Michael's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to tell her they couldn't, that it was wrong, that it would only bring pain. But as he looked into her eyes, all he saw was honesty. All he felt was the undeniable truth that she had been there for him in ways Claire never had, especially at the end. He sank onto the couch, his hands clasped together. Evelyn sat beside him, close but not touching. "I don't want to make this harder for you," she said gently. "If you don't feel the same, I'll step back. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. You deserve to know." Michael's mind raced. He thought of Claire, of the years they had shared, of the heartbreak of watching her walk away.